So I'm going to be doing something a bit different in this video. Normally, I'd showcase a few weapons from my Terraria mod, but for this video I'll go much more in depth with creating a weapon, and partially making projectiles. Today I'll be covering one weapon, created using everything I go over in this video. This video will contain everything I found to be important in Terraria modding, specifically for making weapons. Also a quick disclaimer, I'm not actually an expert in this at all. I've only experimented with Terraria modding, and I'm not adept at coding at all. I apologize if I get any terms or concepts wrong, and please correct me if I make any mistakes. I want to get this video out as a guide for how someone should start modding in Terraria, since I struggled a lot when I began learning. Also, this video will probably be outdated in like a few months anyways, because Tmod likes to change a lot of things between new versions. So here's a brief outline of what I'll be going through in this silly mini lecture type video. This isn't your average tutorial, so no copy and pasting. I implore everyone who clicked on this video that needs the information to learn how to apply this info, especially in a world infested with generative AI. Without further ado, let's begin. Sprites. You need them for anything you want to make in the mod. Sprites have to be upscaled by 2. Sprites have to be in PNG format and should have transparent backgrounds. If you want to animate a sprite, which I won't cover in this video, you need 2 pixels between each frame, or 1 pixel prior to upscaling. So, what I mean by sprites having to be upscaled by 2 is that its pixel aspect ratio should be 2 by 2. That means each 1 by 1 pixel in your sprite should be 2 by 2. Usually, this can be done with some kind of built-in function in your drawing software. For Krita, it is the function scale image to new size. I said this earlier, but every image should have a transparent background and also be saved as a PNG. On to apps and softwares you can use for pixel art. I personally use Krita for spriting, but other popular options include Asprite, which has paid and free versions, Paint.net, or PDN as it's referred to in the community, and Photopea, which is web-based. These aren't the only options. You can use basically anything that lets you export a PNG and lets you make small sprites. Now, onto coding. Before you code anything, you will either want to use a placeholder or create a sprite for your weapon, or anything for that matter really. How Tmod Loader works is that each script you write that is intended to be something with a sprite, which can be an item, projectile, buff, or a dust, requires an image file with the exact same file name, or else you get an error. Make sure you spell everything correctly or you will get compiling issues. If you ever need to change a file's name, just rename both the PNG and the C# file. On to what IDEs you should use for Tmod Loader. I believe it is most common to use Visual Studio for scripting because it has the least amount of issues, not to be confused with Visual Studio Code. I was, however, using Visual Studio Code, and most of the things were working for me. I don't really know the difference between the two, besides the visuals and UI. Now I'm going to briefly go over the basics of C#. Import statements are required for you to use some of Tmod Loader's different tools. To write one, you write using and what you are importing afterwards. The most important ones in my opinion are using Terraria, using Terraria ID, Terraria Mod Loader, and Microsoft XNA framework, but of course you'll be using others too. And of course, in C#, you will have to end mostly every line with a semicolon. The only exception is when you are not using curly brackets as wrappers. Every time you make a class or method, you use curly brackets to separate the code for those things from the rest of your script. After your imports, which should go at the very top of the script, you will have to write a namespace. Now, I don't really know how to explain what a namespace is, since I barely know what it is myself, but just see it as how your project is organized structurally. You put the namespace, then the direct path to the folder it is housed in. After that, you have to write your class. For classes, this will be like every new thing you add to your mod. Write public class and then put down the item's name, then the colon and mod item name, mod item. The mod item behind the colon is an interface. Again, I don't really remember what an interface is, but I just see it as a more strict import statement, like something new import and you must follow the rules of whatever that is. Okay, now we can move on to the good stuff. In the mod item interface, we set up the basic properties of our item using the method setDefaults. We actually have to override the method, and please note that some methods are voids, which return nothing, and others can return booleans and vector 2s. This mistake cost me hours before, so I don't want anyone else to fall victim to this small thing. Anyways, item width and item height dictate how large the item's hitbox will be in-game. Please note that it does not change how big the item's sprite is, or how big it looks when held. Also, you can hover your mouse over different things in Visual Studio Code, and Tmod Loader has a description for certain things. This lets you experiment with different properties and discover ones you may need. Item.damage is self-explanatory, and it takes an int. Now is a good time to discuss the different types used in coding. Int is short for integer, and is a number that doesn't have a decimal. Floats are any number, including decimal points. When assigning a float, you must have f at the end of the number. The times where you would see an int over a float is anything specific, such as frame counters, IDs, mana, sizes, and damage. Bools or booleans are true or false values. They can be assigned as true or false, or be assigned a condition such as 1 is less than 2, which is true. They are often used with selection statements like if and else. Strings are your text values, and you usually use them when you debug or print a test statement in C#. To debug, you actually have to write main.newText and your string inside that. You can also check what type something needs to be when hovering over it. Okay, alongside item damage, you have item.damageType. To assign a damage type, you must reference from the damage class. The vanilla ones that I know of include melee, magic, summon, and ranged. Item.knockback is a float that determines how much knockback your item should have. Similarly, item.crit increases crit chance, but takes an int instead. Item.value is an int that determines how much an item sells for in copper. Item.scale is how big the sprite should be when used, and also changes the melee hitbox size. You typically want item scale to be around the range of 0.8 to 1.1, or else it looks weird. Item.mana determines how much mana the item consumes. Item.autoreuse is a bool that lets you hold down your weapon. Item.useTurn is a bool that turns your character to the direction of the cursor. Item.noUseGraphic makes it so that the item doesn't appear in your hand when you use it. Item.noMelee makes it so that when an item is held out, it doesn't deal melee damage. Be careful with this one, since it's always turned to false, but ranged, mage, and summoner weapons don't typically use it. And I say some of the more important ones at the end. Item.useTime is the cooldown between uses. Item.useAnimation is the time that the animation should run, and often shares the same value with useTime. Item.shoot determines what projectile the item should shoot. If you want to use a vanilla one, use projectile ID, and get the vanilla projectile you want. If you want to use a modded one, write modContent.projectileType, and write inside the arrow thingies instead of the parentheses. Item.shootSpeed determines how fast the object is upon shooting. Okay, that was a mouthful. Now onto other methods in mod item. You can override the bool shoot, and that allows you to change things when shot. By default it returns true, but you can also return false to prevent the item from shooting its intended projectile. Override bool alt function use is another override method that I use frequently. It allows the item to record a right click. When a right click is done with an item that has an alt function use return true, the attribute player.altFunctionUse is equal to 2 in the shoot method. We can then put that in shoot and make it shoot another projectile instead. Now to make our own projectile, we'll need another file along with the projectile sprite. Make sure the names aren't the same. I usually like to put projectile at the end of the name of the item to differentiate between the two. Instead of mod item, we write mod projectile. We still override setDefaults, but now we change the projectile and there are some new attributes that I'll go over. Width, height, and damage type are the same as items. Penetrate determines the number of enemies the projectile will pierce through, with it defaulting to 0. If you want to pierce infinitely, you can set it to -1. Time left determines how long the projectile will last for. A value of 300 lasts for 5 seconds, for example. There is a property called extra updates, which increases the amount of frames per second the projectile will work with. If you use this setting, you will have to increase time left accordingly, as well as making other adjustments. Projectile.friendly is a property that when set to true allows your projectile to damage enemies. There's also projectile.hostile, which when set to true damages players and NPCs. Finally, projectile.tile collide and ignore water properties just allow projectiles to collide with tiles and not be slowed in water respectively. The methods for mod projectile include on kill, which is when the projectile dies, on hit NPC, which is when the projectile damages an NPC, and AI, which runs every tick. And that's basically the main meat and potatoes of projectiles. I'll show you how I made this simple tungsten cube weapon for watching this far into the video. I have this sprite, I made the item, and set its defaults. Here are the defaults I used. I made it stackable and consumable, so when I use it, it gets reduced to my inventory. Since it shoots a projectile, I'll add a shoot speed too. I set the shoot property to a custom mod projectile. Projectile width and height will be 16. It will pierce through 3 enemies at a time. The uses local NPC immunity attribute allows you to manipulate the amount of immunity frames an enemy gets after getting hit. To change the frames, use the local NPC hit cooldown attribute. I want this to be a ranged weapon, so set the projectile's damage class to damage class.ranged. I set the time left to 300 so the projectile lasts for 5 seconds. I want this to damage enemies and not players, so friendly is true and hostile is false. I want the projectile to collide and ignore water, so set both of those to true as well. For the AI method, it runs every frame. I create a gravity effect by adding a small amount to the Y velocity. I also wanted to, upon the projectile getting destroyed, play a sound and add dust. And here is how I did that. And finally, we have a throwable weapon. Now, you might be wondering, how did you learn to mod? Well, 3 things. 1. I stalked the Tmod Loader Discord server, looking at other people's issues and questions. I'm kind of scared of interacting with people, so this is the next valid way for me to get what I need. I used it to find out why something in my code isn't working. I'd recommend talking to the people there instead. They are pretty helpful and not every issue has been gone over before. 2. The example mod is an open source mod that has a bunch of different items, systems, projectiles, and NPCs that you can use as reference. It's great for understanding the basics of modding. And 3. The GitHub for Tmod Loader also has a wiki for guides. One that was particularly useful was the geometry for rotating things. This is probably the best resource for learning. Now you can create some weapons. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching and goodbye.